Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're at in the world. Welcome to the third and final day of the 2020 International eConference on Atheism. My name is Dr. Darren Slade. I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research. We're the organization that brought you this 3-day virtual event. I want to say thank you so much for coming out and participating and attending the conference. Your support means the absolute world to us. And with that said, I have the distinct pleasure of being able to introduce Dr. Andrew Hung from Hong Kong. Now, Dr. Hung today is going to be discussing Charles Taylor on the imminent frame in a secular age. Dr. Hung is a lecturer in the College of Professional and Continuing Education at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He's professor of Western philosophy and Chinese culture at the Division of Social Sciences, Humanities, and Design. His research focuses predominantly on Charles Taylor, Christian ethics, Western and Chinese philosophy, and of course, hermeneutics. His recent publications, book and journal article publications, include Habermas and Taylor on religious reasoning in a liberal democracy, Paul Tillich and classical Confucianism on religious ethics, Language, Meaning, Morality, and Community, a philosophical note on Taylor's phenomenology of language. And with that said, I am happy to introduce my friend Andrew here. You have the floor, sir.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. Actually, I'm now living in Hong Kong. So, actually, now is morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's very different from the US. My wife actually just sleeping next to me. She is still sleeping. Originally, I want to use the computer in the living room. However, the Wi-Fi connection is not so good, so I have to come back to the bedroom to do the presentation. Okay, I have a PowerPoint here. It's about Charles Taylor's writing, especially his book, big book, Secular Age. And in his final few chapters, he has actually the Secular Age. Charles attempts to articulate the process of person's secularization and the changing condition of beliefs, and in his final few chapters, he has described the modern world as the framework of the modern world as a kind of immanent order. So for Taylor, one of the distinctive features of the Western secularization is the replacement of the worldview of transcendent supernatural order by the framework of the immanent order. I think you can hear me right. I cannot see the, so I just keep. I cannot see. Okay, I see the chat. Okay. The immanent order is constituted by several features such as disenchantment, perfect self-disciplinary social order, instrumental stance, and sacred time. Usually, scholars attribute the causes of disenchantment to Renaissance, humanism, and scientific revolution and the Reformation. However, for Taylor, the reason underlying all these movements was originated from the Reform. It's not just the Reformation; it's a long period. It's a long period reform. The aspiration to remote European society according to the demand of gospel and of civilization. The Reform not only means the Reformation, as well as just said, but it's a series of social reform movements by the church and elite since Hildebrand Reform of the 11th century. It was due to the dissatisfaction with gap between the devout and the layman, and it attempted to repeatedly to rebuild the moral integrity of clergy and then later the society and the life of the mass of laity, so as to conform to higher standards perceived by these elites. The reform lead to two consequences. You can say one is the stress of inward devotion and individualism, and the second is the denial of magical element of all religion as idolatry and disenchantment. Okay, the inner aspect of the disenchantment is the replacement of the porous self by the perfect self. The porous self is opened and vulnerable to the external spiritual force, and the perfect self now is not vulnerable and not open to the world of spirit. The development of buffered identity involves the growth of disciplinary personal life, in particular in the area of sex and anger, and the establishment of the disciplinary social order. In pre-modern world, people understand time as higher time, which trace the profane time ordering and link up events that are far apart in time. For instance, for example, the sacrifice of Isaac and the crucifixion of Christ were linked through their conjoining places in the divine plan. However, with the development of mechanistic science in 17th century, modern people understand time as secular, ordinary, homogeneous, and mechanistic, as an indifferent container of historical event by Newton time. With the change of time consciousness, our understanding of the world has also changed from the idea of cosmos in ancient to the modern idea of universe. Cosmos is an ancient idea of the totality of existence, which contains a sense of meaningful order with hierarchy and the apex of eternity. With the rise of nominalism, it led to distinction between natural and supernatural. For example, the reformers strove to make distinction between grace and order of nature. This distinction, on the one hand, ran against the idea of an enchanted world and cosmic order. But on the other hand, for Taylor, they were also kind of achievements. This distinction fit perfectly with the rise of modern theory raised by post-Galilean natural science. It brought us the idea of natural physical universe governed by exceptionalist laws which reflect the wisdom of the Creator without the reference to any telos. With the rise of the scientific revolution, the idea of cosmos faded, and people now find themselves living in a universe mechanistic order. Such new context emphasizes constructive action and an instrument attitude toward the world. All of this become a new constructed social space in which the disciplined individuals with buffered identity reside. This is what Taylor calls the immanent frame. And the modern people can practically experience living with the immanent frame because the new science provides a theoretical support to the idea of an immanent order. The immanent order is impersonal and self-sufficient. It can be understood in its own terms without reference to transcendent interventions. This new perspective of social reality has objectified the social reality as something governed by its own laws. Under the influence of mainstream secularization theory, many people think that the immanent frame must be closed to the transcendent. However, for Taylor, he thinks that the immanent frame allows both open to transcendent or the closed spin. Taylor uses the term spin because he doesn't think that either view is obviously and compelling. Both involve a leap of faith. Taylor argues that the conversion experience of the Great Awakening wave of Pentecostalism or some black Muslim in the USA show that the aspiration of transcendence is still alive today. Actually, it's not just this example. Taylor, he has many books and he has written a lot about the romantic poetry. He just found that in those poetry, it also showed the aspiration of transcendence. According to Taylor, we are strong evaluators. We inevitably distinguish between terms which are incommensurably higher than others. Accumulation of the lower in the immanent order can never compensate for the lack of the higher. However, the intellectual hegemony of secularists has formed what Taylor calls closed world structures that limits our grasp of things in certain way unconsciously. The first feature of closed world structures is about modern epistemology. Regarding to modern epistemology, usually we will think that we build the knowledge through the perception of information expressed as inner representation. With such epistemology, we have to grasp the world as neutral fact before we posit values, and it makes us difficult to argue for the existence of transcendence. However, Taylor rejects modern epistemology by referring to a phenomenology of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. Taylor argues that we are inevitably engaging the will in our perception. There's no so-called neutral stance of things precede their values. It's just like Gautama. All our understanding is, influenced by certain pre-understanding or bias. There's nothing so-called neutral perspective from nowhere. There's no such things from hermeneutical perspective. And the second feature of closed world structures is about the account of the death of God. It's illustrated in two ways. First is the liberation of science, and the second is the contemporary moral experience. First, the whole driving force of modern science has been the establishment of materialism. It presents materialists as view of courage adult who resists the comforting illusion of earlier religious belief in order to grasp the reality of indifferent universe. This led to the unbelieving attack on religion as resisting to face the truth. Religions are considered as rising from a childish lack of courage. Morally speaking, religious demand to refrain from satisfying human desire is attacked by unbelievers as imposing a kind of mortification on others, as a kind of terrible self-mutilation animated by pride. On the contrary, unbelievers have the courage to take up an adult stance, to face reality, and to affirm human good without illusion or consolation. And people can do this to introduce modern moral order, which aims at mutual benefit. However, Taylor finds that the argument from modern science to all-embracing materialism, for instance, in the work of Richard Dawkins, is full of holes and unconvincing. Actually, Taylor didn't explain why he finds it unconvincing or do any analysis, but I think he can just refer to certain, Christian writers who is writing something about Richard Dawkins. At least I know one, which is written by Alistair McGrath. The book's name is Dawkins' God. Taylor does not deny that science does play an important role in the story of secularization. Taylor thinks that the attraction of materialism lies in its new sense of our identity and morality. Its definition of our ethical predicament, in particular as beings capable of forming beliefs. Natural science enables us to grasp and control the world. It gives us images of power, of untrammeled agency, of spiritual self-possession, in contrast to childhood faith by religion. Thus, for Taylor, the secular twist is out of the change of moral outlook, or changing understanding of fullness of life, rather than that of epistemology. I think Taylor used the notion of fullness of life as a contact point to dialogue with different religious or non-religious different school of philosophy. So I think we have to be aware of this. And actually, at the finally, I will discuss about these notions of fullness of life. It leads to lots of controversy. Taylor has outlined four connected phases of the account of coming of modern secularity, which is widely implanted in modern humanist culture. The first is the death of God thesis. The second is the original motivation of religious belief. It's out of primitive irrational fears for the unknown and the desire to control the elements. The third, which with such thesis of irrational religious motivation, the subtraction story argues that as long as the older religious belief have dissipated, what led to us is the exclusive concern of human benevolence and justice among equals. Fourth, usually people will see secularization as a recession of religion in the face of science and rationality. However, according to Taylor, there's a leap in the influence of the subtraction story. It's the third point, especially the subtraction story, is that as long as the older religious belief is disappear, and then what's come up is the human concern of human benevolence and justice. According to Taylor, the exclusive concern of human good doesn't necessarily move us to the concern of universal benevolence or justice. And the humanist demands of universal justice and benevolence is stringent and heavy burden. It cannot be explained by just the subtraction of older goals, the otherworldly aestheticism. Actually, for me as a Chinese or Asian people, I mean, it's quite obvious. I mean, in Asia, I mean, no matter China or Soviet Union, I mean, they are a communist party and their ideology is atheism. But it doesn't seem that they will support. At least their value is very different from the Western one, right? They won't really support the human right or liberal democracy. So I think this is, as what Taylor said, after eliminating the religion, it doesn't necessarily mean that the concern of universal justice and benevolence will come out. There's no guarantee. It can have other ways. Furthermore, subtraction story has excluded the possibility that Western modernity might be maintained by its own original theistic vision. Indeed, he has neglected the fact that the idea of modern world order origins from certain theistic thinkers like Locke, and there exists an idea of Christian democracy. So, for me, I mean, from a Chinese background, I can really agree with this, since from Chinese tradition that there's no Christianity is not mainstream. Not only mainstream, is really marginalized or disappear in Chinese history. So we don't have such idea of equal right of human. We don't have such idea. Now we have, because it's from the Western influence. It's the influence from the Western society. Western world is not generated from Chinese itself. All this show that religion does not necessarily stand against equality and universal benevolence. On the contrary, Taylor thinks that it might offer insight into the limitation of Enlightenment values, understood as wholly sufficient. It also shows that the rise of modern world order is not necessarily an anti-religious spin. With the demise of religion, people no longer take their norms from an authority of God. Rather, they realize that they had to establish their norms for themselves on their authority. People now find themselves standing in front of a silent universe without any guidance. They find that this kind of self-authorization is an exciting challenge that inspires our sense of strange beauty in this indifferent universe. Indeed, Berlin thinks that such self-authorization is a progression from the barbarity to civilization. However, Taylor criticized Berlin, for neglecting the fact that our current values are deeply anchored in our past. If we forget the fact that values are continuous with our past, the notion of self-authorization can offer us more radical traits. They can be a new humanism, like communist-leaning communist humanism, or temper humanism like Camus, negation of self-determining meaning, or Nietzsche's anti-humanist self-authorization, which rejects humanist ideal of universal benefit and equality. Taylor's analysis shows that even if we endorse the idea of self-authorization, it does not necessarily support the idea of Enlightenment humanism. For instance, Nietzsche and Camus are advocating these kinds of immanence, which stresses the imaginative courage to face the world and to be energized by it to the creation of meaning. And Taylor criticized such narratives of self-authorization, in particular the creation of value in face of the world, are far from self-evident. These ideas should be based on the understanding of human nature that need to be discovered, argued, and better defined, rather than being endorsed. And that's why Taylor stresses that whatever is open or closed-spin, both also involve a leap of faith. For articulating these different phases of expression of modernity, Taylor argues that these secularist narratives are actually based on shaky assumption and illegitimate naturalization of profound cultural variation, and it has regretted the possibility of flourishing religion in modernity. And Taylor also pointed out that people living within the immanent frame in modern is indeed endlessly experiencing cross-pressure between the open and closed perspectives, or between the draw of narratives of close immanence and the sense of their inadequacy. Such cross pressure is shown in a three-corner battle, a three-corner debate, a debate between theism, secular humanism, and neo-Nietzscheans. Both secular humanism and neo-Nietzscheans agree that we are liberated from illusion of religion, and thus we can affirm ourselves. While secular humanists endorse the Enlightenment idea of benevolence and justice, neo-Nietzscheans criticize the disciplinary moral order by these humanists as crushing our spontaneity and creativity. For both secular humanism and theism, neo-Nietzscheans' rejection of ordinary human flourishing is also a kind of mutilation, and theism, same with neo-Nietzscheans, criticize secular humanism for rejecting the human aspiration of transcendence or something higher in life as stifling. For Taylor, these debates and criticism show that each side actually raises problem of dilemma about fullness of life for the others. Basically, Taylor agrees with humanist concern of benevolence, equality, and human flourishing. However, he stands with theism and neo-Nietzschean in recognizing the inimitable aspiration of transcendence. Thus, he argues that Christianity should find a way to achieve the maximal demand of fullness integrally in the face of such dilemmas, that is, to achieve human highest spiritual aspiration, to show a path to the transformation without mutilation. The pursuit of transcendence should not be at the expense of pursuing ordinary fulfillment. Actually, I didn't write it here, but Taylor has several criticism of certain Christian church or tradition which have a problem of code fixation, just too much emphasis on moral code, and just it has neglected the Christian teaching of grace. This is one of Taylor's criticism of the modern church. According to Taylor, the sense of fullness came in an experience which unsettles and breaks through our ordinary sense of being in the world with its familiar object, activities, and points of reference. Taylor assumes that the fullness of life cannot be lived without transcendence. However, Simon During, Jonathan Sheehan, and John Horden criticized Taylor for neglecting the fact that many modern people are not concerned about issues of religious and non-religious, theism or atheism. They are rather indifferent to these religious controversies, and this is actually quite true, especially among Chinese. Many Chinese, you can see most of them believe in folk religion, but their attitude, you can see, actually are not really concerned about what these religions are teaching. Sometimes they even mix up the deity of Buddhists and the Taoists. My grandma is that kind of person. They don't really care about their teaching. What they care is to pray for God's protection, the supernatural power to protect, to give prosperity, and to protect the health. To protect the family. Is what they are concerned. So you can say they are. Can you say they are religious? I think it's. I don't know. I think their concern is still, very humanist. You can say, and they are just want to borrow use the transcendent power, the supernatural power, to foster the human flourishing, rather than really concerned about the meaning of transcendence. So I would say, superficially, many Chinese are religious person, but in depth, they are actually quite indifferent to religion. During and Shan argues that many unbelievers are quite satisfactory living in the mundane. They don't make sense of Taylor's idea of fullness. This is again true to many Chinese. Horton would say that hanker after the transcendent does not therefore conclude that whether these religious answers to the hankering are not simply a comforting fantasy. In the face of meaningless, some may just face such meaningless with courage and to live for mundane life. That's to live for prosperity, healthy family, and good times with friends. And actually, Taylor seldom discussed the situation of indifference. He did mention once in his response to Steve Bruce. He's written a book about God is Dead, about a theory about secularization. he predicts that at the end point of the development of religion in the U.S. is widespread indifference. However, Taylor disagree. I mean, for him, he finds that the struggle between aspiration of transcendence and resistance of such demand is perennial. He could not imagine that the demand of religion would just disappear like that. And another issue related to the fullness is about the idea of transcendence. Since it seems that Taylor's understanding of transcendence is orthodox Christianity, I mean, but not everyone understands it in this way. For instance, Bernstein, while he acknowledges Taylor's sense of fullness and aspiration of transcendence, he argues that it's possible to do it without committing oneself to the existence of a transcendent God. Bernstein refers to Hegel's combining human yearning for something beyond with critique of the ontological division of the immanent and transcendent. For Hegel, instead of endorsing vertical transcendence, Hegel preferred the idea of horizontal transcendence of the spirit in the immanent, and that's why Hegel's philosophy is usually considered to be an immanent humanism. Bernstein criticized Taylor for failing to provide a strong ontological foundation of the existence of a transcendent God. What Taylor has given is just a confession of faith. But to be fair, Taylor's writing is different from apologetics or other kind of philosophy of religion. He seldom discusses about the existence of God or whatever. His concern is mostly on the development of the modern morality or the identity of or the sense of self and their perception of religion. I mean, it's not. I think Taylor never write about the proof of existence of God. I mean, he don't write about this. I think probably this is not his concern. And William David Hart criticized Taylor's conception of transcendence and naturalism as too narrow. Taylor's understanding of naturalism is a reductive account, however, it's not the only option. Taylor has neglected the option of interment day, disloyalty, and the naturalistic forms of transcendence. For instance, Hart propose the idea of a naturalistic Christian ethics. It does not believe the existence.